Welcome back to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. In today's video, the Kitchen Table series, our longest running content series, returns with its 70th deck. And today we are going to take a long look at a mono red one-shot burn deck. Thank you for choosing MTG Burgeoning for your Magic the Gathering content. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video and consider becoming a subscriber. Doing so supports the channel and makes you eligible for our various subscriber rewards series. If you would like to support the channel further, then click the link to our Patreon page in the description below. There you can join our ongoing Pack Wars series as a 1-month supporter or ongoing member. Or try joining Pack Wars for free by commenting on every MTG Burgeoning video in a month. We strive to offer creative rewards through our various Patreon tiers. So if Pack Wars isn't for you, then something else will be. Links to our content and various subscriber rewards series can be found in the description below. Send us an email, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram. We are your channel for all things magic. Greetings and salutations to the MTGBC. You are the MTG Burgeoning community. Welcome back to the Kitchen Table series. Today it's deck tech number 70, a mono red concoction that has the capability of one-shotting an opponent with a fantastically overpowered burn spell. As generally is customary with the Kitchen Table series, let's begin with the mana base. There aren't going to be too many thrills, chills, or frills in this land base. We're going to look at 23 basic mountains. They're all right there, 23 of them. And to top it off with the lands, we've got one copy of Valakut the Molten Pinnacle. At ETB's tapped, and whenever a mountain ETB is under our control, if we control at least 5 other mountains, we may have Valakut deal 3 damage to any target, and it also can turn sideways for 1 red mana. If you are planning to mimic this build or are looking to do something similar with it, there's absolutely no reason why you can't put 4 copies of Valakut in this deck, taking out 3 of the mountains, giving you 20 basic mountains, and then 4 copies of Valakut. That is absolutely a thing to do. The only reason why we don't do it with this deck is because the copies are unavailable. So for the purposes of this deck tech, 23 basic mountains, 1 Valakut, but absolutely has the room for 3 more. Alright, but we're not done with our mana base, we're just done with the land base. Since this is Kitchen Table, you know we're going to throw in our customary Soul Ring. 1 to cast, tap it for 2 colorless mana. It's going to be integral to speed up our mana acceleration so that we can cast these big old beefy burn spells and make sure that we can send our opponents straight out of the game. Alright, in addition to our 1 Soul Ring, we are going to play with a full play set of Seething Song. It's an instant for 2 and a red. It gives us 5 red mana for the mana investment of 3. That's going to help us to cast some of the other mana rocks that we're going to talk about that are so important to get onto our side of the battlefield so that we can cast those big old beefy burn spells as quickly as possible. As we were just talking about mana rocks, we are going to play with a full play set of Thran Dynamo. For the mana investment to mana received, you are not going to find many that are better than Thran Dynamo. It's going to cost you 4 generic mana, but it's going to turn sideways to give you 3 of that right back. 4 copies of Thran Dynamo. And rounding off our, shall we say, mana base and one of the most integral cards in the entire deck, it is going to be a full play set of Pyromancer's Goggles. Now, this is a legendary artifact, so we're only going to be able to have 1 of these on our side of the battlefield at a time as long as your playgroup is observing the legend rule. Not all do, but if yours does, you only really need 1 to one-shot an opponent. We're going to invest 5 generic mana into casting this. We're going to tap it to add a red mana to our mana pool, and when we do, if we use this mana to cast a red instant or sorcery spell, we get to copy that, and we may choose new targets for the spell. So now you can see how we can generate a quick number of mana artifacts to power out one of our big beefy burn spells, and then use Pyromancer's Goggles to copy that and make sure that we can one-shot an opponent with one of those spells. 4 copies of Pyromancer's Goggles. Now, before we get to our actual finish off opponent one-shot spells, let's take a look at some, we're going to call this some battlefield management. So we're going to make sure that we include some spells that rid the battlefield of any pesky creatures or any other things that might harm us as we're trying to ramp out our artifacts, so that we can get to our game, or to our opponent game-ending spells. And we're going to start with a full playset of Lightning Bolt, 1 red mana at instant speed, 3 damage to any target. We can pick off some early creatures, perhaps some planeswalkers, or just send 3 points of damage straight to the face of an opponent. In addition to the 4 lightning bolts, we're going to play with 2 copies of Shattering Blow. Now, this is a 1 mana and any combination of 1 Boros mana, but since this is just going to be a mono red deck, this is going to cost us 1 and a red. And what it does at instant speed, we exile target artifact. Better than Shatter, better than Smash to Smithereens, because in your particular metagame, if you are dealing with a lot of things that might have indestructibility, Shattering Blow is going to get around that each and every time, because the artifact is not going to get destroyed, it's going to get exiled. Think Blightsteel Colossus. 2 copies of Shattering Blow. Next up, and this is inspiration for all of those token decks or tribal decks or any decks that get off to a very quick start from a creature base, we're going to include 2 copies of a classic Pyroclasm. 1 in a red is going to deal 2 damage to each creature. And as you can see, we have no creatures in this deck, so casting this spell will have no effect on our board whatsoever. 2 copies of Pyroclasm. All right, now a few one-ofs. Some are going to help manage the battlefield, while others are going to manage the battlefield, as well as giving us some additional benefits to having them under our control. The first is Mizzium Mortars. For 1 in a red, we can deal 4 damage to target creature we don't control, but if we pay its overload cost of 3 and 3 red, then we're going to deal 4 damage to each creature we don't control. Again, we don't have any creatures in this deck, so for the purposes of this particular build, this is going to be 3 and 3 red, deal 4 damage to each creature. 1 copy, Mizzium Mortars. Next, we have a copy of Chain Reaction. 2 and 2 red at sorcery speed, it'll deal X damage to each creature, where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. So if we've got a battlefield with like 12 creatures on it, for just 4 mana, each creature is going to take 12 points of damage. From a mana invested to outcome ratio, if the stars align correctly, there are going to be very few spells that are going to be more beneficial to us in this deck than Chain Reaction. Next, we have 1 copy of Fiery Confluence. Same exact mana value as Chain Reaction, 2 and 2 red. We may choose the same mode more than once, but we get to pick any 3 that we want. So we can either choose Fiery Confluence, deals 1 damage to each creature, or it deals 2 damage to each opponent, or we can destroy target artifact. More often than not, we're probably bending towards the direct damage, because we already have some artifact removal in the deck, and the creatures on the battlefield are going to be more of our concerns than any of the artifacts, particularly because the Shattering Blow, if they're in our hand, of course, will help to make sure that we can mitigate any problems with those particular artifacts. All right, next up, we have 1 copy of Chandra the Firebrand. Now, this Planeswalker is 3 in a red, enters with 3 loyalty. We can +1 to have Chandra deal 1 damage to target creature or player. We can -2 Chandra, and whenever we cast our next instant or sorcery spell this turn, we can copy that spell and choose new targets for the copy. So this is a way to hedge against the potential of having our Pyromancer's Goggles destroyed, or maybe we're just having bad luck drawing them. We can't keep them on the battlefield. We can't get them into our hands. We can plop down Chandra, take 2 loyalty counters off of her, and do the exact same thing that Pyromancer's Pyromancer's Goggles is going to try to do in this deck. And lastly, as a -6, if we ever get to do her Big Bang ability, she'll deal 6 damage to each of up to 6 target creatures and or players. That is a personalized Inferno for all of those old school nostalgic Magic players out there in the MTGBC. All right, our last one of it's one more Chandra Planeswalker. It is Chandra Flamecaller. 4 and 2 red. She ETBs with 4 loyalty counters. And we can +1 to create 2 3/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste that are exiled at the beginning of the next end step. For 0, we discard all the cards in our hand, then draw that many cards +1. So if our hand is empty, we can 0 Chandra to draw a card. And more beneficial than the first 2 abilities, we can -X Chandra to deal X damage to each creature. All 3 of these abilities are pretty relevant for what we're trying to do in this deck, particularly if there are some opponents that are just a few life points away from losing. We can create the tokens that have haste. If we need another card in our hand, we can 0 her, or if we need to manage more of the battlefield, Chandra Flamecaller's X ability is not going to be hard to use. All right, so we are left with our 10 game-ending spells for our opponents. The first play set is going to be Fight with Fire. 2 and a red at sorcery speed with a kicker of 5 and a red. So combined, it's 9 overall mana if we're going to kick the spell. Fight with Fire deals 5 damage to target creature. If this spell was kicked, however, it deals 10 damage divided as we choose among any number of targets instead. So if we get the benefit of using 9 mana to cast and kick Fight with Fire, and if we can use the Pyromancer's Goggles to copy that spell, we can do all 10 of that damage times 2 right to the face of an opponent, and dropping 20 points on them is easy as Sunday morning, as long as we've got the mana and a copy duplicate like Pyromancer's Goggles, or the aforementioned Chandra the Firebrand will also serve suit here. We're just looking to have the 10 damage doubled to 20, and we're not going to divide it. We're going to send 20 of it right to an opponent if that opponent has 20 life. This is also a great way to finish off multiple opponents in a game as we tick down towards the mid to late game. If they have if there's any number of opponents that have 20 or less life, we can always pick and choose and split that damage up, bringing their life totals even more perilously close to 0 or under 0. 4 copies of Fight with Fire. Now, the next playset of our game-ending spells is a little less words for the description, that's for sure, and it's the exact same investment of overall mana. We're looking for a 9 mana spell. This is at instant speed. It's Searing Wind. It's going to deal 10 damage to target creature or player. 9 mana is all we need, just like Fight with Fire. No splitting up of damage, no dividing things up, no looking at multiple targets. We're going to use this, we're going to cast it, we're going to copy it, we're going to send 20 damage to an opponent and say, good game, let's shuffle up for the next one. 4 copies of Searing Wind. And lastly, the last 2 cards in this deck, it is Bonfire of the Damned. Now, for the purposes of this deck, we are hoping to cast this for its miracle cost. We would prefer not to have this in our hand, because we can inflict so much more damage if it's the first card we draw during our turn. So, if we're just casting this from our hand, it's XX and a red, which means you pay the same value for X twice. Bonfire of the Damned deals X damage to target player and each creature they control. So if X is 3, this overall spell is going to cost us 7. 3 for the first X, 3 for the second X, and then 1 red mana to tie it off. So for the investment of 7 mana, we're dealing 3 damage to each creature a target player controls and that player themselves. If we are able to copy that with Pyromancer's Goggles or Chandra the Firebrand, then it'll be 6 damage to each creature and that player instead. If we are fortunate enough to cast this for its miracle cost, then it's just X and a red. So we don't have to worry about paying the value of X twice. We just pay it one time. And again, if we have our spell copier out there in Pyromancer's Goggles or Chandra the Firebrand, that should lead to good game for that opponent as well. 2 copies of Bonfire of the Damned. And there you have it, MTG BC. We got a mono red one-shot burn deck. Let me know your thoughts about this build in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic.